We all know the European Union is a massive force in the world. But how it all works, who's actually calling the shots, that can be seriously confusing. Today, we're going to peek inside the EU's engine room and figure out what's really going on. So, let's just ask the question straight up. Who runs the EU? Is it the presidents and prime ministers you see shaking hands on TV, or is it a group of powerful, unelected judges in Luxembourg making decisions that change the lives of hundreds of millions of people? Well, the truth is, it's both, and they're locked in this fascinating, constant tug-of-war for influence. You see, at the very heart of the EU, you have these two competing forces. On one side, there's the council system. Think of this as the voice of the individual nations, representing their own political interests. And on the other side, you've got the Court of Justice, which speaks with one single voice for unified European law. This tension, right here, this is the dynamic that defines the entire European project. Okay, so let's dive into the first one, the political side of the equation. This is the council system, where the interests and the power of the individual member states are front and center. The whole philosophy here is called intergovernmentalism. It sounds a bit academic, but the idea is actually pretty simple. Just think of it like a club, where the members, the countries, hold all the power. To get anything done, they all have to negotiate and agree, and you can bet that their own national interests are always the top priority.
So how does this club actually function? Well, you can think of it as a three-layer cake. At the very top, you have the European Council. These are the big bosses, the presidents and prime ministers, and they set the overall strategy, the grand vision. Then, one layer down, you have the Council of the EU. This is where national ministers get together to hammer out the details and actually pass the laws. And doing all the crucial prep work, the real heavy lifting, is a group called Corper, basically the ambassadors who get everything ready before the ministers even walk in the room.
And here's a fascinating twist. The Council of the EU isn't just one single entity. It actually meets in 10 different formations. So when they're talking about the budget, the finance ministers show up. When they're talking about fish, the fisheries ministers show up. It's kind of like a shape-shifting institution that adapts to cover literally every area of policy you can imagine. Now, all this political deal-making could get pretty chaotic, so to bring a bit of stability to the whole thing, the Lisbon Treaty created a full-time president of the European Council. This person serves a 2.5-year term. It was a huge change from the old days when the presidency rotated every 6 months, and it was designed to create more consistent leadership at the top. So, if you remember one thing about the Council, let it be this. It is all about building consensus. Yeah, they have complicated voting rules, but their default setting is to talk and talk and talk until pretty much everyone is on board. They have this collective memory of past political crises where things ground to a halt, and they will do almost anything to avoid that happening again. All right, let's completely switch gears. We're leaving the messy world of political horse trading and entering the much clearer, much more definitive world of the Court of Justice of the European Union. And the philosophy here is the polar opposite of what we just discussed. It's called supranationalism. This means power is handed over to an authority that sits above the individual nations. The court's rulings aren't suggestions. They are legally binding on every single member state, creating one common legal system for everyone. The court is made up of one judge from each country. But here's the absolutely critical part. Their independence has to be, and I quote, beyond doubt. They are not there to fight for their home country's corner. Their only job is to interpret and uphold EU law, period. Very early on, the court established a principle that was a complete game changer. It's called the supremacy of EU law, and it means exactly what it sounds like. If a law in, say, Germany clashes with an EU law, the EU law wins, every single time. This one idea is what gives the entire EU legal system its incredible teeth. Now, to show you just how powerful this is in the real world, let's talk about one of the most famous cases in the court's history. And it all started, believe it or not, with a bottle of French booze called Cassis de Dijon. It seems so small, but its impact was absolutely gigantic. So here's the story. Germany banned this French liqueur, saying its alcohol content wasn't high enough to meet German standards. But really, this was just a sneaky way to protect German companies from French competition. So the court stepped in, and the ruling was revolutionary. They said, look, if a product is legally made and sold in one EU country, you can't just ban it in another country for no good reason. And boom, just like that, this case created a hugely powerful legal idea, the principle of mutual recognition. This one court decision wasn't just about a drink anymore.
It became a legal wrecking ball that smashed down thousands of protectionist trade barriers across Europe. And it's one of the key things that made the single market possible.
So now we have our two big players on the board. We have the political council, always trying to find a compromise between nations. And we have the powerful court, which just lays down the law. So what happens when these two worlds collide? Well, you can see how their whole approach is fundamentally different. The council runs on this consensus culture. It's all about negotiation. The court, on the other hand, is often accused of judicial activism. Critics say it doesn't just interpret the law, it actively shapes it, pushing European integration forward sometimes faster than the politicians ever intended. There's this legendary quote from a legal scholar named Eric Stein way back in 1981. He said the court basically built a constitution for a kind of federal Europe, all while the member states, the politicians in the council, were sort of looking the other way. They let it happen through what he called benign neglect. Now, the politicians do have their own ways of making decisions, of course. For many issues, they use a system called qualified majority voting. It's a compromise designed to be fair to both big and small countries. To pass a law, you need a double majority. 55% of the countries have to say yes, and those countries have to represent at least 65% of the EU's total population.
But here's the incredible thing. Even when they can use this voting system, they almost never do. A formal vote is actually pretty rare. The political side of the EU will always prefer the long, slow, messy process of negotiation over the clean, decisive act of just taking a vote. It's a complete contrast to the court, whose entire purpose is to provide a final, definitive answer.
So, where does all of this leave us? It leaves us with a system that is held together by this really unique and often very delicate balance of power. At the end of the day, you realize that the EU's power doesn't really live in a single building in Brussels or Luxembourg. It exists in the space between them. It's the product of this constant dance, this push and pull, between the political will of 27 different nations and the unifying, binding force of a single common law.
And why does any of this matter? Because this dynamic, this is what the whole argument over national sovereignty is about. The answer to the question, how far and how fast should Europe integrate, is decided by which of these two forces is stronger at any given moment. This right here, this is the engine room. This is the source code of the entire European project. For more than half a century, this delicate balance has somehow held. But in a world that's changing faster than ever, you have to wonder, which voice is going to get louder in the years ahead? The collective voice of the nations or the single powerful voice of the law?